trillions of dollars of drug money stashed in secret CIA accounts? The dictator of Panama's jewels cut off and stuffed down his own throat? Top secret spy masters that don't exist? I found a top secret FBI report and it's spicy. So let's not waste any time. Roll the intro.
American conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so sacred we can't talk about it. It actually lifted up, and it could actually turn.
I'm gonna ask you to look away.
All right, welcome back to The Conspiracy. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. This is the show where each week we dig a little deeper into what's really going on in this world and who really controls everything. We're trying to get rid of all the bullshit conspiracy theories and figure out what's actually like genuine conspiracy that's happening all around us all the time. And naturally, that has led us to places like the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI and the military-industrial complex, global banking. And in researching Iran-Contra and the CIA drug smuggling through the 60s and 70s out in Southeast Asia, I stumbled across this document that is insane. And if this document is real, it paints a picture that is so much bigger than anything that we were talking about before. This is a top secret FBI report written to Senator Edward Kennedy in the year 1989. We'll go through it in a minute. And it outlines everything that we learned about in the last two episodes in explicit detail, but from an insider classified intel privileged perspective. It gives names and dates. It gives the FBI's perspective on how all of these operations were run, who was actually behind everything, where the money flowed, and it opens the doors into a whole other rabbit hole that we did not know about before. Dozens and dozens of bank accounts all around the world in the name of one Marion Horn, aka J.R. Horn, aka Jerry Horn, who is the CIA frontman for what appears to be all the money from all of these clandestine drug smuggling operations. We're talking dozens of bank accounts all around the world containing multiple trillions worth of dollars. If what this report uncovers is true, the rabbit hole just got so much deeper. So this week, we're gonna see if it's fact or fiction. And I'm gonna do everything I can to show you all the sources that corroborate or throw shade on this document. If you're ready, grab a coffee, grab some tea or something, and let's do our homework. Dear Senator, per your oral request of 5th of June 1989 requesting a full report on the Japanese, Singapore, New Zealand, Kentucky connection, what follows is a complete and thorough investigation of any and all available files of the Bureau, as well as any top secret, confidential, or personal files from the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Departments of the Navy, Army, and Marine Corps, as well as borrowed microfilm records of the World War II Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. If this top secret report were to be leaked in any portion, Senator, you understand that our agents planted in the above agencies would be exposed, and over 15 years of work would be in total disarray. That's the opening statement of this letter, and already it has just said that the FBI has agents planted in the CIA, the Department of Defense, etc. And the opening paragraph goes on to say, we have interpreted your request to include as full and in-depth investigation into the present assignment of Major General Robert L. Ferrera, as well as into his total work from 2nd of February 1942 to present. That investigation is as complete as possible, given the total silence we have encountered whenever we have as much as mentioned his name. It continues. During the tenure of Richard Helms as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, decisions were made by the director with implied approval of the Oval Office to draft a blueprint and put into motion a plan by which the CIA could have as much funds as and when needed without the knowledge of Congress. It goes on to say, if Congress or any other uninformed do-gooders ever became aware of this operation, this agency and its director will invoke the 1949 Central Intelligence Agency Act, which exempts the CIA from all laws requiring the disclosure of functions, names, official titles, salaries, and numbers of personnel employed by the agency, etc. Using this as the cloak of legality, Director Helms put together a team of 5 people. Here's where we'll meet the major cast of the first part of this story. The 5 experts picked were General Edward Lansdale, who ran the CIA activities in Vietnam, William Colby, who was to be put in total command of the blueprint operation when enacted, George Bush, who asked and received approval to have his top aide, Richard Armitage, be brought aboard, and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ferrera, a top CIA asset who at the time was on an assignment in the Congo on the Patrice Lumumba situation. Yes, Robert Ferrera is that secretive. We don't know who he is. There's no record of who he is. He used multiple aliases, which we will investigate. All we have is his name on documents and in this report, and you be the judge of whether it's real or not. These people were picked for very specific reasons though, which the report does detail, but I'll do a little bit different with my sourcing. Lansdale seems to be one of the most experienced and shady CIA operatives at the time on this crew, and he was picked for that experience. The report specifically references him stopping the Hook insurgencies. Lansdale reported to neither McCarthy nor the agency's Far East Division, but directly to DCI Alan Dulles, who we met in previous episodes. Alan Dulles seems simply to have regarded Lansdale as his personal agent in matters of third world instability. So Lansdale was a dude. The report simply says that Colby was picked for his knowledge of Southeast Asia and to command the operation's first phase. He goes on to be a fucking psychopath, and later he becomes the director of the CIA. So who knows if he was chosen because he's a psychopath or not? I don't know. Bush was chosen because of his wartime flying ability, and that's what the report says. He was a pilot with a lot of experience through the war, and he was also already embedded in Southeast Asia through his private companies and businesses in the oil industry. He knew China very well and had a lot of business connections. The report details that he was responsible for getting the opium connections from China for this drug trade. Armitage, the report says, was their gopher, their go-between between the group of insiders and anyone on the outside that didn't know about it. Armitage was the bridge, the liaison. And our mystery man Ferreira was in charge of acquiring all the drugs from various governments around the world. It also says that he had command of up to 12 languages and that he was the founder of the Green Berets Special Forces and was regarded as their unofficial commander in Vietnam, which, what? The dude is, you'll see. As we get into this report, Ferreira is a force. But that said, when you look up the United States Special Forces, the Green Berets, his name isn't anywhere to be found because he doesn't exist. Credit for the founding of the U.S. Special Forces is either given to Aaron Bank, Russell Volkman, or Wendell Fertig. And I don't think either any of these guys are Ferreira by a different alias. I don't know what the story is here. I mean, this is just Wikipedia, and we're talking about top secret classified FBI documents, so who knows? The master plan called for the CIA to enter into the drug smuggling business in a total and complete fashion. Bush would be the secret head of ONA, the airline they were going to use, and would handle all the shipping of the drugs under forged waybills. Armitage would be the gopher for the group and the intermediary with any undesirables. General Lansdale would handle all the distribution network and collection services within the military in Vietnam. As in, Lansdale would sell the drugs and get the money with their own soldiers in Vietnam. William Colby was to handle the setting up of all the manpower from runners, peddlers, pushers, collectors, and so forth, as well as the elimination of any who might prove to be uncontrollable, be they American or Vietnamese. Lieutenant Colonel Ferreira was to use his contacts in Latin America and in the Middle East to obtain from various governments the needed drugs, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, LSD, etc., as ordered by Colby. Bush was to handle the opium from China. The operation was given the code name Eagle 2 at the request of Ferreira, for he felt it would be lucky to have the same code as the Eagle project he had participated in when he was in the OSS. So I looked up that Eagle project. Sure enough, there was an Eagle project. And who knows, maybe he's in this photo. Probably not, though. Before the operation was really off the ground, Colby started his phase of elimination of dissidents, and he did so under the code name of Phoenix Program. Colby became insane with his power, and before he was finished with Phoenix, over 20,000 suspects were executed, and over 2,500 US citizens were accused by Colby of being collaborators, and they vanished. Helms attempted over and over again to have Colby eliminated, but found that it could not be done because Colby had his own blackmail recordings of all of their meetings. Colby became such a problem that they had to go all the way up to the Dulles brothers and orchestrate a way to get him out of this operation. Helms found that he had to make an arrangement with Colby, calling for Colby to resign from the group and forever retain his secrets. In exchange for the resignation by Colby, Helms, with the approval of Dulles, promised Colby that he would, in the future, become the director of the CIA. This promise was kept by Helms. Colby withdrew. The report goes on to talk about how the plan went so well and they were making so much money that they couldn't help themselves from sponsoring takeovers of governments in places like Japan. It says, Bush personally picked an obscure party formed in 1955, bankrupt with very little membership, to back in a possible takeover carried out on their part. It was finally decided to give to this obscure party all of the funds needed, and before they finally achieved power, a sum of over 300 billion Japanese yen had been funneled to them. This was carried out by Lieutenant Colonel Ferreira, for he had a very special relationship with the first cousin of Emperor Hirohito, Prince Hiruka Watanabe. This, in effect, was the start of Operation Eagle II, which over time has now evolved into what is referred to as the Japanese, Singapore, New Zealand, Kentucky connection, which is the big thing that we're about to look into. I'm skipping over a lot here, but the report details how eventually they put George Bush in charge of the CIA specifically so that he could unwind this whole mess that got made by this Japanese money laundering fiasco, because it came really close to getting exposed in the 70s when the puppet of Helms, Prime Minister Kakue Tanaka, got caught with his hands in the cookie jar making money on the side in the scandal involving Lockheed Martin. That was a real thing that you can look up. And yes, you can see how bribes were being paid to the Prime Minister, Kakue Tanaka. And so they decided to put Bush, one of the original members of this group of five, in charge of the CIA so that he had the privileged authority and the privileged intel about this secret operation that was not public by any means, so that he could unwind it secretly. Remember, we are several years down the line now, almost 6 to 10 years from the inception of this whole scheme. The report goes on to talk about this very specific figure, 318 billion Japanese yen that had been sent to this Japanese party that needed to be laundered back to the CIA. It says part of the closing solution called for the return of the 318 billion Japanese yen to the CIA, or to whomever the director Bush named as recipient. It was decided that a wealthy and loyal party member was to be found in Japan, one who would agree to have his name entered into backdated records as having been the individual who loaned the funds to the party. The only logical person was handpicked by Prince Watanabe, Mr. Soichi Iisuka. Iisuka was a very respected multi-billionaire in Japan and totally loyal to the royal family. Thus, he agreed. In order to do this covertly and not let it trace back to the CIA, they needed someone in Japan to agree to put their name on these documents. They also needed a businessman in America who was morally gray and not so well known that the news would pick the story up, and who was in the right position to have their name go on all these receipts. But that's a position of huge trust, because if that person's name is on this transfer, that person has a certain amount of control over all these billions of dollars that are getting funneled. So they devised a pretty complex money laundering scheme whereby they use gold certificates and exchange them for a certificate of time deposit at Mitsui Bank Ltd. In Tokyo under the number 4051100-92. And they planned for Iisuka to sell the certificates and then theoretically invest the money in a bunch of different investments that would all turn out to be losers, so he lost the money that he didn't actually get for it. And then that certificate would go on back and make its way back to this guy that they were searching for. But the FBI here detailed that Helms was such a perfectionist, probably why he was so good at his job, that he wanted to find the perfect individual to launder the money to in the United States. And so they actually sat on this plan halfway finished for years and years and years until they found the right person to launder the money to, is apparently what happened. Again, I don't write the rules. I don't make this up. This is what's in the document, and we will corroborate this stuff with other things, and you'll be the judge of whether this is all real or not. It sounds crazy, but trust me, it is just getting started. Just wait till people start shoving people's balls down their throats. For real. Speaking of that, let's briefly talk about General Ferreira, because he's about to become really important. Everything in this document and all other sources seem to indicate that Ferreira is like a force to be reckoned with. He is extremely high up in the chain of command and has access to a lot of sensitive information. He has a lot of his own contacts that no one but him has access to because of the partnerships and friendships that he's made. And it over and over references his loyalty and his contractual obligation to his word, that people at the highest levels of government trust Ferreira at his word, which is weird. And weirdest of all is that Ferreira seems to have a really strong moral code. And it says specifically that when Ferreira found out that the drugs were being given to US servicemen instead of to the Viet Cong as he had been led to believe, he immediately was like, fuck this shit, I'm out, we're done with this operation. And it literally says that a contract by Dulles, Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA, was put out on the colonel, but a leak, because the colonel had his own sources, enabled the colonel to defend himself. And then first the colonel called upon his dear friend Prince Watanabe and informed him what was transpiring. Then without any stop, he contacted other very close friends, such as Baron Louis de Monche, the Chief Justice of the World Court, as well as Baron Philippe Dudaphne, whom the colonel had saved from Nazi Germany. And then the colonel called upon Baron Guy Rothschild, the head of the Rothschild banking family, because Colonel Ferreira had been very instrumental in obtaining fake Nazi credentials for the Rothschilds, which enabled them to escape occupied France. So the CIA was trying to assassinate him, and he called in the fucking Rothschild family to defend himself. And eventually they had a little get together and were like, okay, you don't tell anyone about this, and we'll all just go, we're all cool, right? And Ferreira was like, we're all cool, I give you my word, stop trying to kill me. And they took him at his word, and they stopped trying to kill him. I'm reading from the report, word for word right now. Helms obtained the word from Ferreira that with his oath, he would never divulge any part of the operation. Ferreira agreed and went so far as to give him the solution to the continued control of the Japanese by suggesting that they use a company to make a shitload of money in Japan and to fund individual party members and control the party from the bottom up, rather than trying to control the prime minister and control the party from the top down. And it worked really well from there on. If you haven't noticed already, everything about this just really highlights that it's not a concentrated cabal of one world government controlling everything. And it clearly is a bunch of individual, highly powerful, highly connected, highly wealthy spies, essentially, individuals, private individuals, that are all vying for control of these operations, all looking out for their own interests. William Colby was like, yeah, I'll do that for you if I can be the director of the CIA. Ferreira was like, we're not doing that anymore. I'm going to stop this operation. And then they tried to kill him, and then he called in the Rothschilds so that they wouldn't kill him. And then they had to come to an agreement because they both had power in that situation. Everyone is just vying for their own desired outcomes, and they have a ton of power. And it makes it so that when 5 dudes get together, they can smuggle billions of dollars of drugs all around the world because they have high-level secret clearances and can command large amounts of military force without anyone of the parts of these conspiracies knowing what's actually going on in the bigger picture. And everyone kind of has their own personality in the storyline, but Ferreira is definitely the dark horse of this story. And we'll get back to Ferreira in a minute when he starts chopping people's balls off. But first, we need to meet the dude who wound up being the buyer for this CD and got all tangled up in the money laundering side of things, and is the reason why we have this report and the reason why we know about these dozens and dozens of alleged bank accounts all around the world controlling trillions of dollars of illegal assets. And the guy's name is Marion Horn Jr. And this is the best photos that I've got of him. He's getting pretty old at this point, but this is our guy, J.R. Horn. J.R. Horn was the guy whose name they were going to use to put on all the bank accounts that they would be laundering all this money into, so that it wasn't going directly into CIA-controlled bank accounts. So there was this, plausible deniability there. And it was all going smoothly according to plan until Richard Helms realized that he needed a bunch of money to support this Contra thing that was going on over in Nicaragua. And so no sooner did they find the perfect buyer to close down the whole Eagle 2 operation that Richard Helms decided, actually, fuck, we kind of want this whole drug money laundering scheme thing still open. We just want to move it over to South America. And so they tried to reverse it all. It's a little unclear how this all transpired, but Horn and his crew did something wrong in the accessing of the funds through the Singapore Trust, and they got flagged for someone thinking it was a fake certificate, and they got arrested in Singapore It might be because Helms made it so that the thing got flagged as a fake. It's hard to say. They go over it in this document, but we're also going to talk about it in our other source that we'll go over in a minute. And it led to Helms being able to arrest and imprison everyone involved on J.R. Horn's side of that deal. And they all were disappeared into prisons. If you want, you can pause and read through this, but I'll also show you where to find this document as well as all my other sources at the end of this video. But it sure looks like Richard Helms' plan was to put Horn and all of his buddies in jail, probably indefinitely in Singapore or wherever else, and then to use Horn's name on all of the bank accounts they were going to launder all this money through all over the world to just keep the operation turning with poor old J.R. Horn's name being used while he's in prison. But something mysterious happened, and someone that they don't know who it was came and helped Horn out, and he was set free. One important quote to read here is, "At this point, Senator, how much is fact and how much is fiction is hard to tell." Those are the FBI's own words. So let's slow down here. Let's slow down. This is crazy, and it's about to get a lot crazier. We should talk about the source and how we corroborate whether this is real or not. And I did a lot of digging, looking for all kinds of cross-references of whether this is real or not, and I found something. Now, I'll have you know that this is probably the most complex topic I've ever researched. It is the most secretive. There are the fewest sources to corroborate things. It is very weird. But I stumbled across this book by Ken Peelock. I found it originally in a weird PDF format, and then I found out that PDF was being sourced from this book. And the opening line reads, "I met the richest man in the world on October 20th, 2012 at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, Kentucky, i.e. prison." He's referring to Marion J.R. Horn. This guy, the one whose name is on all of those accounts. And in Peelock's book, he goes through his extensive investigatory process of trying to help Marion Horn access these funds and prove his innocence to get himself out of prison. Kind of a long story, but Horn had tried to use the funds as collateral to receive a loan to get a house or a mortgage or something, and then the funds had been shown to not exist because the CIA wouldn't declassify the existence of the accounts. Long story. But Peelock says things like, has confirmed the accounts of the Five Star Trust through various people that it does exist, and the accounts of Five Star Trust number in several hundred and range into the trillions of dollars. He claims to have seen this with his own eyes and corroborated it with multiple financial experts. And then I stumbled across the mother lode, Horn's actual cache of PDFs of all of his accumulated legal documentation of the matter, all of the documentation of the funds, letters that had been given to him, a lot of shit. And a lot of this stuff that is on the internet, like this FBI report, it actually turns out is on the internet because this guy met Horn in prison and helped him. And he goes into in this book how they got a hold of this FBI report. Robert Ferrera apparently stole this report from whatever office it was hiding in and gave it to Horn as collateral so that Horn had a bargaining chip. And it seems like this guy is the reason why a lot of this made it to the internet instead of being buried in files forever or destroyed. We're talking like multiple sworn affidavits to the nature of this operation. We're talking photocopies of the original certifications of that CD from Mitsui Bank, the original note for 318 billion Japanese yen, all sorts of classified documents about Operation Golden Triangle and Studebaker, documents that have Robert Ferrera's name for your eyes only on them, top secret, correspondences between the Bahamas trust that Horn had set up and the other banks involved in this, Ferrera's signature apparently, correspondences between Baron Philippe Dudaphne and Robert L. Ferreira that outline the whole situation in a lot of detail. An old photo that even apparently has Horn right here, and it says Ferreira to his left, which means either probably that guy or that guy. It's not very specific, but apparently Ferreira is in this picture, and this is J.R. Horn. This right here is the note that goes with the picture. Green jacket is Marion Horn Jr. General Ferreira on Mr. Horn's left. Oh snap, I just realized that I was misreading the caption of this image. It says that this is Marion Horn Jr. in the green jacket, and it says Robert Ferrera on his left. I had been looking to the left of him and didn't know how to know which one of these dudes was Ferreira. But that's not what it says. It says Ferreira on his left, meaning that is Robert Ferrera, according to J.R. Horn, because J.R. Horn compiled this whole document. And so he's the one that said that on his left here, this is Robert Ferrera. We got him, folks. His whole compendium of documents is notarized by Benny R. Lane, a notary in the state of Ohio. He hereby attests, affirms, and acknowledges this documentation as resume of history and legal case of Five Star Trust by affixing the legal signature. And I looked Benny up, and Benny R. Lane was a notary in Ohio who seems to be inactive expired except for this one. I don't know what this stuff means. I'm not smart, but his name turned up when you search Ohio for notary republics. So I presume that this being faked by him or anyone else is a pretty serious crime. So this was the part where I started to get really weirded out. This doesn't seem like some singular made up fake FBI document on the internet anymore. This is very complicated and has a lot of complex fakes and forgeries if it's not real. So let's summarize everything that we know at this point, assuming this is true. Because adding in all this other 5-star trust stuff from Marion Horn and adding in Ken Peelock's book, the picture expands. And it's not just money smuggled from drugs. It's also money stolen from countries that were occupied during and after World War II. It's large sums of precious metals like gold and silver that were stored in secret places in those countries that were then looted by American soldiers and stashed away, or looted by CIA operations and stashed away. And the allegation is that there are hundreds of bank accounts all around the world with Marion Horn's name on them, all under the name 5-Star Trust with the same bank account number that I read earlier. And in those bank accounts all over the world are hidden trillions of dollars of drug money and hundreds of billions or maybe trillions of dollars of precious metals. And that sounds so fucking crazy and like such a conspiracy theory. That sounds like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I don't write the rules and I didn't make up these documents. And if they're fake, they're a very complex level of fake. They are an extremely detailed fake. If they're real, then, and the last thing I'll say on that is that there's a lot of fake bombshells that have come out over the years that are like, oh my God, the craziest thing ever, that get a shitload of media attention and then get debunked in epic fashion in public. And it's like not hard to find those documents. When you find those fakes, they're all over the internet and they are widely distributed and they are not concealed. This is not like that. I dare you to try to find this shit. Like, try to look it up without using my sourcing and my description box below. Just try to look it all up. It's very hard to find. It's not like if it was, just some made up hoax that every internet personality and their mother would be running with and talking about. It's like, why is no one talking about this? And one last thing that we should talk about is the nature of truth. I don't know if you all think this way about truth, but truth is not a zero-sum game. Truth operates in percentages of probabilities, the way I see it. You never really know what's actually real, what's actually true, especially when it comes to complex history about the CIA. The best you can do is think in percentages of that's pretty likely. Like, we pretty well know that Iran-Contra happened, and we have reasonably strong percentages of certainty about how it all played out. But when it comes to things like this, the question is, are we above 50% burden of proof? Like, is this likely or unlikely? Have we seen enough evidence, enough corroboration that this is starting to become more likely than not? Or is it the other way around? And you shouldn't think of this as an endorsement that this is for sure true. This video is not about proving it to be true. This video is just about exploring the research that I've done over the last couple of weeks and trying to figure out what are the chances that it is true. And if so, what does that mean about the rest of our understanding of the world and the rest of the things that we're learning? You see what I mean? So anyways, let's get back to this FBI file and finish up with Iran Contra. We're about to get to the crazy part of the story. Cartels are about to get involved. Rewinding in time a little bit on Marion Horn's timeline, because we've kind of skipped ahead to meet Marion Horn. But this is back when Marion Horn had been in prison and then kind of got out of prison. He was starting to get pretty freaked out by the whole situation and trying to compile all of his documentation to cover his ass in case this went really south. And Marion Horn felt that he was in too deep and he had to do something to keep the wolves off his back. And the document talks about how he used this guy named John Bennett to try to help him within the Bureau. But Bennett was compromised left, right, and Sunday, and so the FBI was actually using Bennett as an informant as well. And you see how they give in this document, his name is John Bennett, and the last known address in our files on him is listed as 60 Adams Street, Biddeford, Maine. The level of digging that I have done to try to figure out if this is real or not is I looked this address up, 60 Adams Street, Biddeford, Maine. And in the late 70s, it was owned by Margaret Bennett, same last name. And I did so much more due diligence like this that I just don't have time to include in this video. But that's the level that we're going to, because this is all so obscure and so hard to research because it's all secret classified. Like Robert Ferrera does not exist anywhere. And eventually Horn got so nosy and was trying to cover his ass so hard, the CIA was like, we need to get this guy out of here. And they asked Ferreira to be their point guy in discrediting J.R. Horn. As stated before, it was decided that Mr. Horn must be silenced, but without personal harm, for Helms felt that Horn actually believed he was within his rights. It was decided to bring in the general and tell him that this J.R. Horn was trying to cheat the government of the funds that were obtained by the Eagle II project. This is before Horn and Ferreira were acquainted. This is how they got acquainted, because Ferreira started to investigate Horn, eventually had a face-to-face with Horn. And then Ferreira decided that he liked Horn more than the CIA. No joke. Ferreira, who was supposed to investigate Horn, took Horn's side and then saved his ass. To the extent of like stealing classified FBI documents and then giving them to Horn as backup in case they came after Horn. That's for real what happened. Ferreira kept digging and digging, and the more he dug, the more he became convinced that Horn was an innocent victim who had been used by the agency, which was true, and that Horn was as big a red, white, and blue patriot as could be found. Ferreira was by now convinced that Horn was simply a super entrepreneur who had managed to out-hustle the hustlers. We have no idea, nor have we found any documentation that will show us why a hard-boiled general like Ferreira would suddenly look upon someone like Horn as a son that had to be protected from the mean guys. But that appears to be what has happened. That's for real what the report says. This bottom part talks about how Ferreira started to buy really expensive gifts for really important people all around the world and send gifts to these like governors and presidents and just like military generals as though the gifts were coming from Marion Horn so that they would all like Marion Horn. And he did so using his own money. The FBI has receipts that Ferreira was doing that. They specifically say that General Ferreira spent over $500,000 US sending personal gifts as though he was J.R. Horn. Just because he liked the dude and thought the CIA was treating him like shit. So he made him some friends. And we are just getting started with Ferreira. Dude is crazy. The report goes on to say in the middle here that the orders have come down directly from Justice and State that Horn and Ferreira are to be considered untouchables and all inquiries regarding them are to be stopped immediately, as well as all the documentation in our files being shredded. This has been done, but we have not done so until this report was completed for you, Senator. Now, let's get back to those dudes smuggling drugs this whole time. The report comes back to William Casey, who was the director of the CIA at this point in the 80s. In the meantime, Casey had begun to look upon himself as a demigod, and knowing that the agency had to have funds for Colonel North, he started to get very careless. Casey set about establishing his own kingdom, with him as the emperor. He obtained help from the very depths of society and put one Alder Berryman Seal in command of the drug road to obtain the funds for the North operation with the Contras. The agency had used Seal since 1981 as a contact man. This report has explicitly claimed that Richard Helms has been the secret director of the CIA for quite some time by now, but it also says that Casey is starting to go behind Helms's back and do all of this on his own without Helms and without Ferreira, who was a big part of the first five. And you remember what Ferreira thought about smuggling drugs into America, right? And giving drugs to Americans. He was not down with that. Well, Casey had set up the whole Nicaragua, Panama, cocaine from Colombia operation, he'd set all of that up using new contacts and sources, because any source linked to Ferreira would eventually tell Ferreira, and Ferreira would catch wind that they were smuggling drugs into the US. So Casey had set up this whole other new complex operation, and apparently they weren't as good at it. Eventually, the general, Ferreira, got wind that a second-rate hoodlum, once a member of the CIA, was involved in the importation of all drugs into the United States. And it appears that Ferreira had some spare time on his hands. So he asked some of his friends to do something about El Gordo, this alder-berryman seal. And this is where Ferreira accidentally basically exposed Iran-Contra and toppled the entire 1980s drugs and arms smuggling business that the CIA was in, without really meaning to. Because here it details how Ferreira found out about El Gordo doing this drug smuggling, and he called up Casey and was like, yo, is this guy working for you? And Casey was like, oh no, he doesn't work for me. I don't know anything about that. And Ferreira was like, all right, I'm gonna fuck him up. And Casey got off the phone with Ferreira and was like, oh shit. Because obviously El Gordo does work for Casey. He just didn't want to tell Ferreira about it. So then Casey got on the phone with Helms and was like, yo, Helms, we're in trouble. And Helms was like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Clean up your shit, dude. But Ferreira cleaned his shit up a lot faster than Casey did. And by cleaned it up, I mean he sent a bunch of his homies on February 19th, 1986 to wait for Seal at the spot he liked to go to. And then they came up to his car and put 96 bullets straight into Seal's head and body, and he was dead instantly. But that was just the start. Because while this was going on, Casey had been making contact with the kingpins of Colombian cocaine, the Medellin cartel, also the Cali cartel. This is where Pablo Escobar, Jorge Ochoa come in. Seal had set up all those connections before he got absolutely wrecked. And one Manuel Noriega, who was in Panama at the time, had become the middleman in this whole operation. Casey essentially funded Noriega's coup of Panama and took over Panama. And in exchange, they paid Noriega a shitload of money for him to be the mid-base where they smuggled the drugs in and out of, laundered all the money through the Panamanian banking system, and staged all of the Contra forces to invade Nicaragua and overthrow the Sandinista government. At a certain point, this whole operation in Panama with the Contras and all the complexities that Casey had set up came to the attention of Helms, who did not know who was playing for whom. And the only person that he felt placed the country above his personal gain was General Ferreira. So Helms enlisted the general to help dig everything out and figure out what the fuck was going on. And Ferreira found out. But during the process of Ferreira finding out, one of his guys inside Noriega's place, this guy named Spadafora, got caught. And Noriega had him tortured to death in really fucked up ways, and then put his body in a US mail sack and mailed his body to General Ferreira, apparently, in Mexico. That was this guy. It did not turn out well for this guy. Don't read this if you're sensitive. But I'm going to read the next part of this verbatim. This was Noriega's way of making a point. Ferreira, it is rumored, went undercover on his own into Panama and somehow made his way into the compound of General Noriega. There, in the general's own bedroom, General Ferreira is said to have accosted Noriega, bound him up, and personally cut off the testes of Noriega. Then he stuffed the testes into Noriega's mouth. The Bureau recorded the incident in its entirety and the voices with our hidden mics, but somehow this whole documentation has disappeared from our vaults. The general injected Noriega with a full dose of cocaine and left him bound in a drug stupor. It is believed this is the cause of Noriega's cocaine addiction. Noriega cannot inform anyone because he would have to tell all that he is not macho, and he lives in constant fear of Ferreira. He has even offered to make peace with Ferreira, but Ferreira has not paid any attention to the overtures. So don't mess with Ferreira's people. And what happened to Ferreira in the end? Well, the Bureau couldn't pin him down. They apparently tried to kill him twice and failed both times. And it says, quote, now none of our agencies can touch him, for he is under the protection of the White House. This agency feels that the Oval Office knows that to cross the general would endanger the administration. But at the same time, they all agree that the general would take any blame for anything rather than throw any shadows at the presidency, as Colonel North was fast to do. Look up Iran-Contra. And then, get this, direct quote. The Bureau has had as many as 24 agents assigned to monitor all movements of Ferreira, but when he started to approach our agents and reprimand them for terribly sloppy methods of trailing, we just decided to abort. This guy is literally like the master spy, and they tried to spy on him, and he went up to them and was like, yo, you guys suck at spying, get a life. And so the FBI literally gave up trying to spy on him because they weren't good enough at it. Perhaps most importantly, the report points out, quote, when General Ferreira had Seal eliminated, he inadvertently toppled the source of funds for the Contras. For like a domino theory, with Seal gone, everyone started to look out for their own hides, and one thing led to another until the discovery of the so-called Iran-Contra North affair. All because Ferreira was like, fuck this Gordo guy, you can't smuggle drugs into my country. This document concludes with, during the past year, there have been 14 inquiries regarding the general to his various government agencies, and all can be traced to friends and or associates of Marion Horn. We have taken all our agents away from Marion Horn and all of his group and his trustees, as ordered by justice, and we have destroyed all documentation pertaining to them. So in closing, we must add that other information to this Studebaker-Black Eagle affair must be obtained from the non-existing files of the CIA. The last words in this FBI document: we are sure that if the general does not exist, then there are no files. What's the conclusion from all of this? Well, this FBI report was written in '89. Dirty Laundry is way more recent. Whatever these two dudes have been up to since then, they're starting to fade into the shadows and get pretty old. The cast of characters from the original story, Lansdale, Helms, Bush Sr., most of them are dead and gone by now, or they're super old and out of the game, so I guess that's it. I guess the operation's closed up, and all that money and all that gold bullion that they had stashed away in all those bank vaults, all those accounts, all the details that are contained in this report, probably all just vanished back into the caves it came from. Now the Vietnam War is over and the Iran-Contra affair is over, I'm sure it's all done at this point. Packed up, no need for any of those files anymore. Whole operation's closed down. But if there's one takeaway from this story that I want you to think about, it's that you don't need the entire government to be in on a conspiracy for it to work. You only need 5 powerful men that have all the right connections and all the right authority and enough money to make crazy fucked up shit happen. And even if this isn't real, even if this is 100% fictitious, it's pretty instructive about what could happen if the wrong men got enough power and enough shadowy corners to do business in. Oh snap, I almost finished the video without telling you where to find all the sources. First off, if you have Scribd, you can find Dirty Laundry on there, and you can actually find this FBI document on there too. But if you don't have Scribd, then you can go to archive.org and hit this search bar, search for this phrase, and switch it to search text contains. And this is what will come up. And these are all documents in this 5-Star Trust collection. That'll take you to here, and if you click on the tabs one right there, it'll show you all the different PDFs in this collection that Lord knows who uploaded to here. I don't know what they all are, but I know that 5startrust.pdf and the Crime of the Century are both very relevant to what we're talking about. In particular, that 5startrust.pdf is 230 pages of the documents of all the sworn affidavits, all the pictures, all the letters. This is Marion Horn's motherlode of stuff. So that's all for this week. Thanks for sticking with it. That was a long one. Who knows where we'll go next week, but I'm glad you're here. We're learning things.
American conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so sacred we can't talk about it. It actually lifted up, and it could actually turn.
I'm gonna ask you to look away.
Legend has it that Christian Rosenkreuz drew his secret knowledge from the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians.
They estimated 100 yards from the left wing was this 100-foot disc.
You begin to get into this very scary scenario that has to do with the human condition, of the proclivity to accumulate vast amounts of power around a handful of people. And right now, these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
There's so much evidence out there that even if less than 1% is true, that would be enough to collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet. Our security is at stake.